One of the biggest issues to be addressed in our world is poverty. There's a couple different ways to look at poverty. One is absolute, the fact that there are millions of people living on less than $2 a day. But relative poverty also looks at what that $2 can buy and whether people have access to the basic necessities of life. Since the 1980s, there have been many massive international efforts to eliminate this poverty, with mixed results. One question faced by those trying to eliminate poverty is, when should we intervene to stop the cycle of poverty? When mothers are malnourished, their children are born underweight, and this often impacts their brain development. If the child is malnourished, it won't have the energy to do well at school, which means then they'll take a low-paying job that can't afford proper nutrition, and when they become a parent, the cycle gets repeated. So, where should we take our limited resources to stop this cycle? Many of the diseases that accompany malnutrition are easily solved. For example, a lack of vitamin A can cause damage to the eyes, and scurvy is caused by a lack of vitamin C. Those of us living in the developed world often have these vitamins put directly into the food we consume, like the vitamin D that's added to our milk to prevent bone disease. Even something as simple as giving children in impoverished areas products like Plumpy Nut, which is an enriched form of peanut butter that can address severe malnutrition. While kids here in Canada should avoid it because it's really high in fat and sugars, and we get enough of that already. When a large area is experiencing a lack of food, we call it a famine. Famine is a tragedy, not only because of the intense suffering endured, but also because it's unnecessary. Virtually all agricultural experts agree the earth is capable of supporting our growing population. The problem is allocating the food to the right people. Most of the African countries which were stricken with famine during the early 1980s actually produced enough grain to feed their populations. In Mexico, where 80% of the children in rural areas are undernourished, beef cattle consume more grain than the human population. Often the government of a developing country doesn't have the funds to deal with disasters like drought or famine, so they'll get a loan from the World Bank or the IMF. The mismanagement of funds or changing global markets means that the government can't pay the loan back. Some governments were spending more on just paying the interest on the loans than they were on education and health care for their own people. In 1996, the World Bank and IMF took action to help heavily indebted poor nations by lowering the interest rates and forgiving some loans in order to help these countries pay the bill without having such a negative impact on the quality of life of their citizens. But it's important to remember they only did this because of the pressure put on them by individuals and NGOs who protested that wealthy donor nations shouldn't be putting such a burden on less fortunate nation states. There are other issues that come with loaning or giving money to foreign countries, what we call foreign aid. Foreign aid can be unilateral, that's when we just give the money to the country. It can be bilateral or multilateral, where many countries work together to provide the aid. We also provide tied aid, which means that we put conditions on the loan or grant. So, for example, a country accepting the funds must make an effort to improve human rights. Canada works to help NGOs organize the funds they're sending to help people who really need our help. In the past, most foreign aid went to big projects like hydroelectric dams to provide power and water. Today, there's a greater emphasis on helping with smaller projects and grassroots organizations. While major governments still provide millions of dollars in aid, many private groups are crowdfunding to help individuals in the community to improve the economy from the bottom up. And while foreign aid has made a substantial difference in the lives of people around the world, it's not without its controversy. There's a frustration that Canadians have with our tax dollars being sent overseas. But consider this. If we can strengthen the economy of a poor nation, we can turn them into a loyal customer, which would help our businesses. In addition, the amount of money Canada sends is really quite small compared to our GDP. The UN has asked that all developed nations provide 0.7% of their GDP to help developing nations. As of the making of this video, Canada had not yet made this target, although other developed nations have even surpassed it. Find out what we spent on foreign aid last year and see what the percentage of our GDP that is. And here's my question. Why should the standard of living and quality of life in Canada be so much better than someone living in, say, Sudan? Did I do anything to deserve to be born into such a wealthy country? But hold on, I'm not just saying we should just write checks and send them over to developing nations. That's because the aid we've been sending to many countries hasn't solved the issues of poverty and famine. Instead, it can prop up dictatorships and be misspent. In fact, there are those who claim that many of the civil wars and conflicts in the war-torn regions of Africa are in part caused by the desire to be in power. so that the dictator can have control of all of that international aid money for themselves. If we send huge shipments of Canadian grain to an area that's experiencing drought or famine, do we end up undercutting the profits of the farmers living closer to that region? Instead, we need to find ways to provide jobs that will allow the citizens to participate in the global market. For example, in Ethiopia and Kenya, there's farms that are growing the plants and flowers that we purchase here in North America. Developing nations need help to be able to participate in the global economy, not just be given handouts. Okay, let's stop there for today.